Good day, everyone. I'm Lisa Gillette with the Investment Advisor Association. Welcome to our webinar, taking a look at artificial intelligence, opportunities and risks for advisors. Participants will be muted during the webinar. You may submit questions at any time by typing them in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. Only the speakers will see your question. Questions will be addressed as time allows. As a reminder, this session is being recorded on June 22nd, 2023. You'll receive a link to the recording early next week. I'd now like to turn the presentation over to Nancy Hancock, Vice President of Business Practices for the IAA. Nancy?
Hello, and welcome everyone. I am especially excited to welcome our speakers for today's discussion of artificial intelligence, Kirk Nara, who is a partner with law firm WilmerHale in Washington, D.C., where he is co-chair of the firm's cybersecurity and privacy practice and the big data artificial intelligence practice. We also have with us James Sun, who's a senior manager at Western Asset Management in Newport Beach, California, where he spearheads the company's artificial intelligence initiatives and compliance technology. Welcome, Kurt and James. Great to have you with us today. To start us off and understand where all of us are with respect to the topic of AI, let's start with a quick polling question. I'm hopeful that you can all find a means of responding to our question, which is, where is your firm with respect to adoption of artificial intelligence? And there are three choices: considering and interested, but not yet decided, which is to say on the sidelines; actively evaluating in anticipation of adopting; or have begun or are beginning to incorporate into our practice. So please vote now. That's probably enough time since it's a short one. And it looks as though, Lisa, thank you for sharing these results. A little over 50% of this group is considering and interested, but still on the sidelines. Some are actively evaluating, but a pretty healthy number have actually begun to or are incorporating AI in their practices already. So that should be good information for our speakers to have as we have today's discussion. Lisa, you can take that down while we go to our next slide. James, let's start the conversation with some baseline definitions. The press throws a lot of lingo around: ChatGPT, LLM. Can you give us some basics to be sure we're all on the same page with respect to the lexicon of AI and who's jumping into the space?
Sure. Thanks very much, Nancy. Yeah, so there is a lot of hype around AI these days. First, we'll focus on a specific area called generative large language model AI. So it's basically a type of AI that could generate new contents, and contents like text, videos, audios, and so forth. So think of it as a computer program that can actually chat with you like a human being, but it's also learned from all the data in the internet, and also can process a vast amount of information. So as an example, this whole, the art picture on the left and even the sentence itself, it was actually generated by an AI. So it wasn't for me, but it was actually generated from the OpenAI software itself. ChatGPT OpenAI, it's the, I think most of you have heard about it. Basically what it is an AI chatbot that can actually converse with human beings. It was released only on March 23 officially. Yeah, it's about 100 million monthly active users, and it has over 1.8 billion visitors visiting their website per month, which is a extremely large number. It's actually the fastest subscribed software in history of all technology, faster than TikTok, Instagram, and all the other social media softwares included. And there's a lot of interest, not just from the big tech and the tech company itself, but including finances also, right? So these are some of the finance companies we are aware of that are actively working on AI or ChatGPT like AI within their company. So Bloomberg has their own version called Bloomberg GPT, which should be released sometime this year. And we know that Citadel officially announced that they'll be using OpenAI and ChatGPT. Capital Group is actively looking into it. Morgan Stanley has a chatbot they're looking into. PIMCO already has a version of their ChatGPT released in their firm. And JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs also. ChatGPT was basically trained on data as of 2021 from the internet. So imagine taking a AI software and giving it all the data from the internet and the websites and training on it, right? And this includes the websites, highly reviewed Reddit, all the Wikipedia, and all the online books and articles that you can think of. And it was basically trained on over 300 billion words. I think you may be on mute, Nancy.
Not mute, Nancy.
Those are pretty staggering statistics. And so, and particularly when you consider how recently ChatGPT itself was released. Are there any other terms that you'd like to add, Kirk, from your experience, or does everybody know what GPT stands for?
Yeah, so well, let me hit some of the other terms. So I mean, I think that it's, this is a variation, an important variation, but a variation on something that's been developing for a number of years. It's a kind of algorithm, it's a kind of big data analytics. We have seen in the past few years leading up to ChatGPT, and it will continue, is the idea of deep fakes or disinformation, which is essentially using these technologies to manipulate information or manipulate. It could be audio, it could be visual, it could be photographs, it could be movies. It's a kind of aggressive, intentional use of this technology for, frankly, malicious purposes generally. I mean, some of the purposes are not necessarily malicious, they're just goofy, but they can easily be turned into malicious uses. So one of the things we have to be thinking about is, whether the results of this technology are negative. They could be negative because they're malicious, they could be negative because they're inaccurate. I'm sure that most of you could guess that if you looked at 300 billion words on the internet, come up with a percentage of what's not accurate on the internet, and it's a decent percentage. And so what you're ending up with is a formula that's being developed from an information base, much of which is not accurate. And so that's just part of the problem. That's part of the issue here, is that we're dealing, even though there's lots of impressive things that the technology can do, it is nowhere near perfect. And there's lots of misinformation, inaccurate information, intentional misuse through disinformation, and just part of the overall challenge in thinking about how to use this. Nancy, can I mention just one other point? It's tied to the polling question, which I want to just reference because the answer. Over half the people said you were still on the sidelines considering these issues. I guarantee you that almost all of those companies have people in your company who are using this technology today. And what the answer says is that you're not aware of it. And I was giving a presentation earlier in the week to a group of in-house lawyers. I gave them the same message. Your people are using this technology. And so if you don't know it, that's a problem. If you're not aware of it, it's not a problem. It's a problem. If you haven't come up with rules for your company, it's a problem. So just because there's not a formal set of principles in your company yet, don't think that means, all of your employees have read about this. All of them are thinking about ways that they can use it. And until you've given them the right kinds of principles, it's being acted on with real risk because you haven't thought through all the other issues that we're going to be talking about today.
That's a really important point. I mean, there's enterprise use, and then there's individual use. But individual use and enterprise use, it's like texting, right? They can cross over. And so these are things that we can be certain somebody's going to be looking very, very closely at. So, we'll talk more about some of the, the other risks and cautions in a little bit, but first, let's talk about some of the potential use cases in the advisory world. James, can you take us through some of the things that Western Asset is thinking about?
Oh, yeah, sure. Just like Chris said, there's a lot of excitement within the firm itself. And it is really easy to access it, right? If you have a phone, you have access to ChatGPT, right? So, and what we noticed was that there were already various groups and teams and people who are leveraging the technology. So we talked to everyone in the firm, and we decided to come up with the official enterprise use cases that we could actually implement in Western Asset, right? And from there, we were able to bucket them into 6 different groups, right? Well, first one is content generation, analysis, question and answer, learning and technology. So from the content generation portion, much of the interest came from the sales and the marketing team and the product team itself, right? So it's basically helping them generate sales pitches, marketing presentation, any kind of marketing or trading commentary generations that they need to do frequently, webcast, transcript, summarizations, and just blogs and social media captions that we are, our teams are constantly required to do, right? Second part, a second area of the interest comes from the analysis component of it. So from the sales perspective, they want an ability to more quickly prepare for client meetings. So understand what the clients are doing, understand what's going on in the market and our products. And quick insight into large document repositories, right? Much of our teams in Western Asset, large part of their day is involved in just reading a lot of documentation, right? Client prospects, earnings call, 10-K filings, bond prospects, and so forth, right? So we want to have this large document repository where they could quickly get insights to it. Key point instruction on research and disclosure. Every day they get tons of news, street research commentaries, and other data that comes to them and bombard them every day, and they really want to extract key points out of all of these data sets quickly so that they could aggregate in their head. Another area of interest was around ESG surveillance, basically to flag controversies, confirm violations, which is a fairly intensive research exercise, and we really want to leverage the AIs to kind of help us minimize that. Compliance guideline checks is always there, a lot of legal papers. We are extremely sensitive to our clients' mandates, especially on the investment guidelines, so we definitely want to leverage it there. And the last one, which is a common use case, is basically around sentiment analysis. Every time there's earnings calls or any kind of news that comes out, we do want to analyze the sentiments on those, and which will basically have an impact on the market. Third bucket of use case that we're looking into is basically just question and answer, which is the more common use case for these chatbots, general to specific knowledge-based chatbots that are specific to Western Asset. So instead of having a general chatbot that's geared towards the internet, we want to feed it the data that's only specific to Western Asset. And some of the examples of that will be, human resources guidelines, right? Instead of having our human HR team answer every single question and answer, we want to basically leverage the chatbots to answering the employee questions. Fifth one is learning. We have a lot of interest around learning, so staff training, and beyond just watching videos, we want to integrate it into a training program which could actually provide feedback so that their learning skills will be more optimized. And finally, within the technology team itself, and which is a big use case that we're seeing across the industry, it's basically helping them write the code itself and provide IT support. So.
I am tempted to say that we had ChatGPT come up with this list because it didn't realize it was the number 4, but it's mostly accurate. It's mostly accurate, but
that's right.
I think that these use cases are really interesting because you look at some of the, part of the challenge, I think, in this area, particularly as this technology is still in its early stages. I mean, we may get to a point tomorrow, next year, next decade, where this information, where this kind of technology is perfect. It's nowhere near perfect at this point. And so a lot of what I think the challenge is for companies is to think about where this technology could be useful and at the same time realizing what the limitations are of that use. I mean, for example, I don't know the details, James, of what you had in mind with each of these categories necessarily, but let's just say something like sales pitch and marketing presentations. I know that every marketing presentation that every company has ever done has always been entirely factual, has never exaggerated, has never, you know, some of that you may not care about so much. I mean, I think of it, I mean, I'm dealing with this is not specifically on your use cases, but I see a lot of these issues in connection with advertising practices where people are using AI to develop, you know, their advertising models and who's seeing their advertising. If that tech, if the information that gets plugged in the technology isn't very good and the output is not accurate, what that means is that the wrong people are seeing your ads. I don't care that much about it. Your marketing people may care about it. Your return for investment people may care about it, but I'm not that concerned about that bad advertising. If it's ChatGPT using to build a model to diagnose whether somebody's about to have a heart attack, I want that to be accurate. That really matters a lot. And so I think you have to distinguish there. Some of these points, accuracy is really going to be important, and you're going to have to, you may still be able to use the technology to get a head start, but you're going to have to build in checks and balances. Other ones may not be that big a deal. I mean, for example, some of the, I think it was maybe your key point of extraction. You were talking about the large document repository. We were looking at large volumes of documents. That's not necessarily a new technology to use AI to review documents. As someone who deals with that all the time on investigations and litigation, I can tell you it's not very good, but it is helpful. So what you're doing is you're basically doing a percentage assessment. You're doing an evaluation. You're saying it might take us a year to read every piece of paper. We can do this AI review in, you know, a couple of hours. We then have to figure out some way to sort of do a quality check and do a quality review. And I'm not sure that people are building that in right now. I think that there is this sense, only a sense, it's not really any more than that, that somehow this ChatGPT idea and these developments, this is so much better that we don't have to worry about some of those things. That's just not true yet. And so I think that that's really a critical issue. All the companies are going through the same kind of analysis, or should be going through the same kind of analysis. Again, some people may not yet be thinking about it, but there are opportunities to do this. Maybe to just repeat what I said earlier. The people on your teams are thinking about all of these issues. Every department. What you've identified here, James, covers a whole bunch of departments in a company, and so all of them are looking at these possibilities. One of the things that is striking about ChatGPT, from my perspective as a lawyer, is how it touches almost every part of a company potentially. It also touches from a like a law firm perspective, a ton of different subject areas. I mean, I'm used to dealing with privacy and security issues. There's a lane for privacy and security issues. For ChatGPT, this could be everything. It's employment, it's compliance, it's litigation, it's mergers and acquisitions, it's employment, it's intellectual property, it's all of those things have relevant components there. And so I think that this idea, really focusing on what you're trying to do, how you want to accomplish it, why you think this is going to be beneficial, and then making sure you're building in the right kinds of checks and balances. We're going to need those checks and balances, I think, for the foreseeable future in this area. And right now, I think, what we're seeing is this sense that, this is better than that you don't need that. You can just rely on this. And it's just that it's not the case at this point. It's not really anywhere near the case at this point.
Yeah. So accuracy, the need for checks and balances, and just, the sheer monitoring based upon what you were saying earlier, Kirk, about make no mistake, there are people in your firm using this and not just for personal purposes.
Well, I think even your first bullet is important to point that the accuracy point is really important in general. It's just even more important in some use cases than others. And so there may be things where you don't need a perfection standard. I mean, there was a reference on one of the earlier slides to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is fine if you just need to know some basic thing. If you're sitting around the dinner table with your family and somebody says, "Oh, what was that event? I don't really remember that." Wikipedia is lovely for that. Please don't turn in your term paper based on Wikipedia. And it's sort of the same analogy. There are things that you can get. I mean, we're seeing a lot I deal with a lot of students in different places. They're using ChatGPT to write cover letters for jobs where they have a volume of random jobs. That's fine. whatever, that's fine. You can build a model, you can build it, but I would be careful looking at the addressee on each of those letters and just relying on ChatGPT. I want to get it right. If you have a letter to Kirk Nara and then it says, "Dear James," that's a problem. Please don't make that mistake. But the body of the letter that says, "I went to this college and I have these skills," that may be fine. So really think about what's the purpose of your use case and how can your use case go wrong? What could be wrong with the output, and think about building in the right kinds of controls there.
Yeah, I mean, we are obviously a very risk-aware industry, and you've hit upon some of the risks. James, are there other risks that that you have kind of front and center that you're paying attention to?
I mean, I think Kurt hit it on the nail, right? It's emerging tech. There's a lot of excitement and support around it in the whole industry. But it's still at an earlier stage, right? And it does what we call hallucinate, meaning that it will actually confidently give you the wrong answer if it doesn't have the right input, or if it's using the wrong set of data. And we've actually seen that a couple of times already during our test run. So it's actually really important to provide the right data and content directly into the chat, understand the context, and ask the right questions to get the highest quality of answers. And I guess one of the biggest risks is, as you said, finance it's different. Our industry is different. It's not like Facebook or other social media where you could get one or two things wrong and it's okay, right? We're much more of a black and white, yes or no type of industry. And our making incorrect decision does have a monetary and reputational risk for all of us. So I do think that is a huge risk for us to take if our industry decides to adopt this tool without fully understanding how it works internally and being careful about our data itself. So,
yeah, I think those are critical points. I think, this is an area where I don't think you have to be a technologist to deal with these issues, but I do think you have to be conscious of the technology and be aware of the technology and understand what it can do and what it can't do. I mean, there's an anecdote, it's an example rather than an anecdote. There's an example that's floating around in the legal community of a lawyer who used ChatGPT to write a brief and submitted a brief to a federal court that contained completely made up quotes and citations. And the lawyer wasn't sure they were right, so plugged into ChatGPT. Are these all accurate? And ChatGPT assured him that what they generated were accurate. And the other side is like, these cases don't exist. And it turned out they were entirely made up. They were, the right sounding names, and they had case names, and they had the right words. They just were not actually things. And so we're going to see those examples in as many scenarios as you can think about. And so, I think part of the challenge here is to even figure out how in a company you manage these issues. It's going to take it's a good cross section of your company to figure out how to implement this, what the rules should be, who can use it, what purposes they're used for. I mean, there's a legal element to it. There's a technology end to it. There's a marketing end to it. Obviously, there's a pure compliance end to it. Your industry is obviously more regulated than many other industries. So the compliance piece is particularly important. I said, there's intellectual property. There's how you do your own, you've built many of your companies have built models for financial analysis that is your core business operations. You've got to be careful when you're modifying this stuff. So I think that it's a challenging area right now because the technology is moving so quickly. The opportunities are moving quickly. This is going to come up with some of the enforcement risks. There aren't really rules at this point. But I can tell you that nobody's waiting for those rules. The regulators aren't waiting for those rules. Your customers aren't waiting for those rules. Plaintiffs' lawyers who are going to sue you aren't waiting for those rules.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we see this in the law a lot where technology moves faster than the law does. This is not unique in that example, but it's really unusual in the speed that it has happened with. I mean, again, I've been using privacy law as an analogy in a lot of these situations. Privacy law has evolved over 10 or 15 or 20 years. It's still, the law has not kept pace with technology, but it's not like there's a technology development yesterday and another one tomorrow and another one the day after that. We're seeing that with ChatGPT at this point, and the technological advances and the use case opportunities, and James, as you said, the adoption at record paces. I mean, that package is a really difficult package to navigate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, we've been talking about some of the risks that are inherent to the activities within the firm. What about things coming in from the outside of which to be aware? So, you know, I know we probably all read some things about those. Anything to say on that score?
I couldn't hear the last part you said, Nancy. I'm sorry.
No, just anything to add on that score? I know, you know, the sophistication, believability, et cetera, of phishing
Yeah.
and other incoming. So
Yeah, that phishing, the cybersecurity risks are going to be substantial, and and it's that's not a risk of your company using this technology or misusing this technology. It's a question of this technology being used against your company. And I hope all of your companies are doing things like phishing tests, but man, those are going to get more and more and more sophisticated on a regular basis. I think the disinformation stuff that I was saying before is going to be relevant. What you're going to see is you're going to just make up a scenario. Your company is going to be looking at investing in some, I don't know. Think of some substantial technology company with a public leader who says a lot of things in public, and all of a sudden you're going to start seeing deep fakes about what that person says, and it's going to blow up the markets. And that's going to be a problem. We're going to see that. You're going to have to be conscious of that, and you're going to have some ways to be preparing your people to address some of those things. And you're going to have to get, your business is often a very fast moving business. You're going to have to make sure your people don't overreact to these developments, because they may not be accurate. I mean, they may not be real development. So I think that it is fine for a company to say, we're not going to use ChatGPT now. Again, let's just say that's your business proposition right now. As I said earlier, as Nancy indicated, that's not a viable possibility right now because your people are using it. At the same time, you are going to be on the other end of it using it. It may be your customers, it may be your competitors, it may be, again, the companies you're trying to invest in, people who want to, bet against you on different investments. I mean, you can imagine a whole number of scenarios there where you have to be conscious of how this can be used and be thinking about that. And so, I've been encouraging clients in really all kinds of industries. And I said, yours is because of the regulated nature of it, it's even a little more important than in other kinds of industries. But I think, you need to have a governance project at your company to figure out how you're going to deal with all this stuff. And I realize that some of the folks on this call are with smaller companies, and that's, it's not as viable, but I get that, but you should be careful there. The bigger companies really need to be planning for this and need to be planning quickly, because you don't have a ton of time. It doesn't mean you need a complete and total answer tomorrow, but if your idea is to convene a committee and to have that committee do a report by 2025, that's not going to be good enough. So
yeah, no. So it's a question of embracing innovation in a cautious way, and sort of exploring, adapting all the things that will get us where we need to be in a safe way. So you have we've all alluded to the highly regulated nature of the industry. And so, Kirk, any comments upon where lawmakers and regulators are with respect to technology, both in the US and abroad?
Sure. Yeah, so a number of different points on that. And I said, it's an area where I think the privacy and security analogy is actually a very good one, which is what we are seeing from the regulators, legislators, and sort of other interested audiences. That might be media, that might be plaintiffs' attorneys, but let's focus on regulators and legislators for the time being. They have a couple of reactions at this point. One is they are highly cognizant of the progress of this technology. They are, to overgeneralize, but not by very much, they are very nervous about adverse implications of this technology. At the same time, I don't think they are looking to shut it down. They recognize that there are, meaningful opportunities for both consumers and businesses going forward. At the same time, they're very uncomfortable with some of the ramifications. And so what we are seeing is regulators who are nervous. They don't understand everything that's happening. They're not sure of the impact. Again, we're seeing that in privacy and security. We're seeing that in other kinds of big data analytics where they're concerned about discrimination risks. They're just concerned about bias. They're concerned about manipulation. And what they do is they do a variety of different things. They try to give guidance, but when they don't really know what's going on in the universe, they can't really give guidance yet. So one of the things they do, and we're seeing this with, and I know this isn't quite for your field yet, but we see it with the Federal Trade Commission. You guys are largely not messing with the Federal Trade Commission, fortunately, but Federal Trade Commission, we're seeing it with state attorneys general, and we're going to see it with the other specialized regulators. They're launching what I call inquiries. They're not really investigations, but they would be, requests to, a dozen different people in the field that look like investigations, and they're sort of couched in investigation language, but they're basically trying to learn what's going on. And, if you're a recipient of that, it's uncomfortable. And again, I get that. I totally get that. But it's also important to understand that most of the time in those situations, they're not actually looking to bring a case against you. They're looking to gather information. Then we are certainly going to see cases that are real enforcement cases. Again, we're seeing discrimination cases. We're seeing what we're called dark patterns, which are sort of manipulation cases. And a number of the regulatory agencies are bringing cases ahead of the law. They're basically saying, there's something going on, we don't like it, and we're going to bring a case to stop it. Now, there may be ways you can fight back on that, certainly, but when your regulator shows up and says, we think what you're doing is wrong and we want you to stop it, again, the choice to fight is a tricky one. I'm not saying do fight, I'm not saying don't fight, but there's a lot of pressure. And some of the regulators, frankly, are counting on essentially acquiescence from the targets because the targets don't want to fight those things. And they're building their rules through that kind of enforcement. Then we're seeing actual rules being developed. We're starting to see people think about those rules. There's a lot of situations right now where there are, the information gathering that goes ahead of a proposed regulation. The other place we're seeing this is plaintiffs' lawsuits, and we're going to see those a lot. We're going to see those, the regulators, even where they're skeptical and even where they're nervous, they still generally tend to be reasonable. They don't bring irrational cases. We could all probably point to exceptions to that, but they don't tend to do that. They don't want to lose cases. They recognize that people are trying to do their, so they don't want to bring bad cases. Plaintiffs' lawyers bring all kinds of cases, and they don't really, if they bring one and they lose, they just bring the next one. They don't really care that much. And so you don't get the balancing in the plaintiff's bar that we see in with the regulators. So maybe that goes back to the use cases that are still on the screen. Some of these use cases, a plaintiff's lawyer is not going to care about. I mean, whether you're using ChatGPT for insight into large document repositories, plaintiff's lawyers don't care about that. But if you're using things to make financial analysis, to do investment decisions, to make things where the accuracy is more important, obviously they're going to pay more attention to that. Certainly any area where there's an impact on consumers, again, maybe not exactly your audience most of the time, but I would certainly think about whether there's impact on consumers in any of these situations. That can be impact on employees for larger companies in particular. Please don't lose sight of that. I mean, one of the places where this is going to be used is in the hiring process. All kinds of artificial intelligence being used to read resumes and do all kinds of stuff like that. I saw an interesting article the other day that was talking about the advertising area for advertising positions that are available. And the thesis that this professor was coming out with, which I buy into, was basically that some of the AI is leading to discriminatory impacts because it's narrowing who sees the opportunities for these new jobs. And certain audiences, underrepresented audiences, don't get exposed to the job opportunities because of how AI works in advertising. I mean, regulators are going to care a lot about stuff like that. And so that's the model that we're seeing. They're again, they're uncomfortable, partially because they don't understand it, but they're uncomfortable about the implications. They recognize that they're not trying to shut it down, but they are looking for situations that are concerning to them. The other point, Nancy, that you asked about was sort of geographies. We are very much seeing different activities at the international level. And there are international governments, governments in other countries who are further ahead on this thinking. There is, there's some activity in Europe to have a broad artificial intelligence regulation. We're not anywhere near that in the United States. We may not even get there. I mean, we don't have a national privacy law yet. I'd be surprised if we're gonna have a national AI law anytime soon. The Italian government, for a short period of time, banned ChatGPT. I think it was Italian. I think it was Italian government. So there's we very much may have different opinions from different governments. Then we're going to see things like disinformation and the deep fakes I talked about earlier. There may be international countries that want to use that affirmatively for their own political purposes. And so we're thinking about whether this is the kind of technology that if you were you could throw away every other backstory, it would make sense to have international rules on this. It's just hard to think of how we're going to come up with international rules anytime soon. And especially when we think about how broadly these issues can impact. I mean, for example, things like intellectual property. Is that, if you go to ChatGPT and say, write me a song that has these themes, and it steals from a whole bunch of other songs that are out there to come up with a song, we have a view of that issue in the United States on things like copyright. That issue, that's going to be answered very differently if you're in China or you're in Brazil, you're in Russia. We're never going to equalize all those approaches on all of the issues because of how broadly these issues reach across topic areas and across business activities. So lots of interest in these issues, lots of nervousness about what's going on, lots of anxiety because they don't understand what's going on, lots of effort to learn what's happening. But again, that's something that, because it's changing in real time, an investigation into what's going on today is not an investigation into what's going on tomorrow because it's different. And so I think we're going to see a period of, lots of sort of efforts by the regulatory agencies to understand what's going on, to understand where the risks are, to think about some of these other implications. Again, they don't want to be too aggressive. They don't want to shut it down because they do all recognize that there are upsides, at least potential upsides. What we're trying to come up with is a way to manage the upsides while also making sure that there aren't meaningful downsides. That's the hard part when we don't really understand either side of that equation. And so the regulatory agencies are trying to think about that. One area that I know is specific to your industry, which we should pay attention to, is the fiduciary duty obligations. And if you start using ChatGPT or any of these technologies to do anything where you start to touch on those fiduciary obligations, I'd be real careful about that. I'd be real explicit about that with whoever your audience is, whoever your stakeholders are. I'd be thinking about that with people downstream. If you're gathering information from other parties, making sure that you're utilizing information the right way. So just be real careful about that. That's going to be one of the hooks, I think, in your space that the regulators will start looking at.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So I guess we all have to acknowledge that the genie is out of the bottle. And that, and I guess we can all hope for, at least on the part of the legislators, the regulators and so forth, a coordinated approach. So we don't end up with what we have with the privacy laws that can vary so much from one jurisdiction to another. It's confusing enough, with that scenario. So we can hope for the best. And so, I know we said we would take questions. I'm not able to see them. Do we have any questions that have come in that you'd like to respond to?
Let's see, we don't have many. There's certainly, and one of the people mentions, Nancy, that they're having a little trouble hearing you, which I think just be careful on the microphone. Did you want to hit it? We have a couple more points on the slides if you want to cover those while people are thinking about questions.
Sure, let's do that. So we had sort of a summary slide that was a set of sort of, here are the primary takeaways and concerns. And so James, you want to get us started with
Yeah,
that?
sure. Yeah, just before we do it, I just want to add it to Kirk's point about the regulatory. I mean, the authors and the supporters and the big tech companies are also aware of the risk and the dangers of the tech, this AI technology. It is really, really good, especially around um, pretending or generating contents that are very human-like. So there is a whole wide range of teams and not, I don't want to say official regulation, but groups within these companies like Microsoft and OpenAI called responsible AI, where they take all of these data, fakes, and the risk that comes with tech very seriously. So it is a common conversation as you're signing up for these products with these larger tech companies. They will discuss it with you. So I think the the tech stack is extremely good. It is so human-like that we would not be able to tell what's real and what's not in the future potentially, as Kirk mentioned. And I think everyone's aware of the risk of that. So,
Hey, James,
but
can I
yeah,
mention,
so yeah,
can I mention one point on that? Just as you know, some bigger companies, whether they're tech companies or even within your industry, may be thinking about sort of building their own models here. One of the things that's hard with these models is because they're generative, they're constantly changing. It's actually very hard to measure what they're doing, because if I ask a question, you can do this with ChatGPT today. You could ask a question today and it's going to give you an answer. If you go back tomorrow and ask the same question, the answer is going to be different. And so it's very hard to evaluate at any point in time, because that point of time disappears as soon as you get to the next point in time. And so thinking about accuracy, thinking about, how these models work in general, thinking about the evolution. I mean, the point of this is to make them better and better, but it's not always clear that it's an improvement rather than a change. And so that's, for example, we've seen there were some interesting news stories with ChatGPT in the very early days. I mean, early days meaning like 2 months ago, where it started to get national attention. And you had these scenarios with some of the chatbots where like the AI started getting really testy and almost nasty with people as they were getting pushed on different things. And it was like they were almost fighting back, and it was like a hostile customer service person. And that's weird, right? I mean, you wouldn't expect it to work that way, but it seemed to be working that way. And so again, lots of challenges that we really haven't thought about before.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of leads us into the first bullet point, the summary. You really do need to start with a good set of data, and you need to bring your set of data, and you need to tell the AI to use that specific set of data only when you're asking the right conversation. So that's the frequent starting point of minimizing the hallucinations, de-risking incorrect answers, and having a consistent data. So it's all about what we call prompt engineering, or asking the right questions and bring your own content. So if you are in an early journey and if you want to just kind of learn about it, it's okay to just ask data to ChatGPT or whatever topic you want to do, but you need to be cognizant that it's trained on data as of 2021. So you won't get any answers for questions that are later than 2021, right? So if you ask any recent political questions or weather or some other issues, it's not going to know about it, right? So the good starting point is always bring your own data. You need to ask very specific context-oriented questions. So think of it as a human being. You can't read your mind. When you're having a conversation with a person you just met, you need to give the full, specific context and the ideas that you're trying to generate out. So that's the whole thing about being conversational. So you could start with more like a general starting point, but as you're talking with the AI itself, you want to get to that very specific, detailed question that you want to get to. And there's a whole new field called prompt engineering, which is getting extremely popular, which is basically teaching people how to talk to the AI properly. So that's another area that we really need to look at. A third point is it's extremely impressive, and there's a huge potential range of use cases, right? Everything. I mean, I've been chatting with friends in healthcare, tech, finance, and whatever you could think of. They're all looking into it at one point or another, right? So, and with that, there's also a large number of vendors and products available. If you see the diagram of number of startups and venture capital funding that's going into all of these AI products, it's astronomical, right? So, but at the same time, it's at an earlier stage. It's not perfect, and we expect a lot of these companies will basically combine, right, into something bigger as we, figure out the use cases and see where it actually works and where it doesn't.
So let me mention a couple of other things. And James, I'm going to add to one point you said, and I think I'm right about this, but I may be missing a technology point. You mentioned the 2021 point. I think that the 2021 point is sort of, the 300 billion records it grabbed at that point in time. But at the same time, if you start putting data into it now, it's going to grab that data and build it into their model, so that companies actually have to be careful about what data they're putting into ChatGPT, whether, for example, you mentioned healthcare. I see this in healthcare a lot, where people are, without thinking about it, they're putting in sort of patient scenarios to get an answer, to get a feedback based on it. But what they're doing is they're adding patient level detail to the ChatGPT models. And so we're seeing, I don't know if you call that a security breach or a privacy breach or something, but you have to be very careful about how your employees are using it, not just because of what they might do with it, but because of any data that's going to be put into it. So that's another way to be careful about. You need to make sure that you're not inputting into the system any data that you don't want the system and perhaps other people to know about. That could be proprietary data, it could be personal data, it could be other kinds of regulated information. So, again, this is early. The fact that it's early doesn't mean it's not affecting you. And I guess that's maybe if I had to single out sort of one most important message today, is that your companies are using this, whether you know it or not. And they're probably using it unofficially, but that's just as risky as using it officially. So make sure you're thinking about that. Again, I'm not saying don't use it. I was asked at the session the other day whether, if somebody doesn't have a policy, whether their first policy should be not to use it. I'm not at all sure that isn't, to at least send that message out in the first instance isn't in fact a smart thing to say. I mean, your employees may be using these things because they don't know there's any problems with it, or they don't know they're not supposed to. I don't know that you want to say never use it for the foreseeable future, but I could certainly say something along the lines of, you should not be using this for your professional activity, or you should not be using it unless it's cleared through compliance and whatever it's going to be. I do think that's important because of those issues. As I said, I think the privacy issues are relevant here. That's going to be very dependent on the specifics of your particular company and your particular industry and what kind of data you're having. I am seeing meaningful privacy concerns in healthcare, in consumer-driven financial services, in a lot of retail kinds of situations. So there are areas where privacy is a real concern there. Lots of legal and ethical risk. When I talk to lawyers, I talk about lawyer ethics and legal ethics. I think that a lot of the questions about how ChatGPT is going to be used are sort of ethical and moral issues. And part of my message to the lawyers is, even though that's not law, it is relevant to how regulators and legislators and others are thinking about these issues. So I don't know that the moral ethical issues should necessarily drive your legal decision-making, but they have to be included in your legal decision-making. If you ignore those ethical and moral components, I think you're missing a lot of the ball there. IT security risk is absolutely going to be a concern. And it's that there is a lack of regulation, or at least, I don't know if lack is the right word. Regulation is not keeping pace. You need to understand that. But at the same time, the fact that there is not specific law does not mean that there will not be enforcement actions. We have heard from a number of the key regulators basically saying, while we would like there to be specific targeted law on these points, we can use the existing tools we have to police inappropriate behavior in connection with this technology. So we are absolutely going to see those cases. We're going to see them in a general consumer protection sense from regulatory agencies that have authority over unfair and deceptive trade practices. They're going to say use of ChatGPT for X, Y, and Z purpose constitutes an unfair or deceptive trade practice. Those cases are being investigated as we speak, and I would expect to see a lot of those. So be conscious of that. Obviously pay attention to any particular guidance that comes out of your agencies, or pay attention to new cases. But again, those cases are going to happen really quickly. And I think there's a reality check on any uses of this technology where you have to ask yourself, how could this go wrong? What could we be doing wrong here? Is that it seems so objective, and it's just completely not. And I think that just requires an additional level of thinking that, companies often don't do in general, and certainly don't do at the pace that I think this technology requires for now.
Yeah, lots to consider, obviously. Are there, I'll ask again,
I see one question that I think there's one particular question, but let me address that quickly. It says that yesterday the Wall Street Journal published an article that Google Cloud launched an AML, anti-money laundering tool for banks. Can you share perspectives on the use of AI to run a compliance program? And do you agree that AI will not replace the compliance officer, but that it may or will replace the compliance officer who doesn't know AI? That's a good way to put it. But I mean, look, I think, there's a lot of concern in the legal industry that AI and ChatGPT is going to replace lawyers. What it's going to replace is bad lawyers. I mean, it's my job is not at risk anytime soon. And I think the compliance officer is sort of the same way. It may be an advantage to a compliance officer in the sense that, again, it's a large data analytical model. You may be able to use this technology to analyze volumes of data that you haven't been able to analyze before. At the same time, if you just blindly use it and don't think about it, that's a terrible decision, because it's that it may flag some issues for you. It may identify things that as a compliance officer you should be looking at. You're in your industry, a lot of what we see are patterns, right? I mean, there's a trading pattern, there's an investment pattern, there's a communications pattern. This is a large database analytical tool, and so it's very useful to analyze large volumes of data. But you've got to take the output with I'll say a grain of salt, just because I don't have a better metaphor, but you got a whole bunch of grains of salt, and you really got to be thinking about that. It may help you. It may help you identify and narrow where you're searching. It may point you to particular things that you need to analyze, but it's not anytime soon going to get rid of the need for the critical thinking that is high level compliance, high level legal thinking. He said that the purely bureaucratic component of some of these things. I mean, there have been software programs in the legal field for years that'll write you a basic contract or a basic will or something like that. That has not eliminated the need for all of your companies to have lawyers who know how to write contracts, because most of your contracts are not basic generic contracts. And so I think that's where we are for the foreseeable future in connection with the use of this technology in those particularly regulated areas.
Yes, I think I'm in the same page. I don't think it will actually replace jobs, but we believe, at least in the initial look at the software and the tech itself, it will augment your job. So you'll be able to scale out more, be able to do more things. So maybe you get to go home an hour earlier every day, right? Instead of staying until 5, maybe you get to go home at 4. But we don't believe that it's mature enough or impactful enough to actually replace people's jobs. But then again, I do think there may be a certain industry where it will be transformative, but I don't think compliance and finance industry will be one of those yet. So
I mean, like we've had different analogies in the legal field for many years. I mean, when I was a young associate, which was sadly a really long time ago, I had the joy of sitting in warehouses looking at boxes of documents. Clearly the best part of being a lawyer is just sitting in warehouses looking at boxes of documents. And I feel bad for my junior colleagues who probably aren't going to get the chance to do that. But that didn't eliminate the need for lawyers. It just changed what we did. And it didn't let us go home any earlier. It actually, the technology has meant that our job follows us around all the time. And it's, but I think it just changes. It's an evolution. We've had evolutions forever, right? I mean, the idea that when I started out, if you were working on a brief or a corporate transaction or something, you had to go to FedEx, and the company that you were working with could see it the next day, and now we get it. We can respond 50 times in a day. It's just a different model. And I think the challenge here is that it's so hard, and it's so complicated, and it's so all encompassing. Again, you could use this everywhere in your company. And so thinking that through and figuring out how you are going to tame this aggressive, really rapidly evolving beast is going to be a real challenge going forward. And so I could easily build the argument that the sort of compliance kinds of jobs and the legal jobs and the security jobs, that those are going to grow, because there's going to be more and more challenges that we're going to see. And you're going to have to be thinking about compliance in ways that you haven't thought about before. And that's not a bureaucratic function. That's That's a creative, thoughtful function. And so I think there's real opportunity. Again, all these technology things eliminate jobs at the lower end. They don't eliminate jobs at the higher end, and they may require more skills at the higher end. And I think that's where we are going to be certainly for a while in this field.
Type of outsourcing, right? And ideally, you don't outsource the things that take the highest functioning individuals out of the picture. So the ability to, as you say, use an old-fashioned term, sort the wheat from the chaff, is all the more important now than ever.
I mean, I've been using the example, my firm and a lot of the law firms use this AI on your emails so that it flags whether you're sending an email to the wrong person. I get it. But this AI that we use, it can't tell that I'm replying to an email. It asks me all the time, I'm replying to Nancy's email. Do you mean to send an email to Nancy? I'm like, yes, I'm replying to her. Of course I mean to send it to her. If it can't figure that out, it's not very sophisticated. And again, I just think we're a long way away from this solving our problems. It may help us deal with many of our problems. It may at the same time cause a bunch of new problems. That's another key element of this, as I said earlier, is you think about this sort of offensively and defensively. And I think we're spending a lot of time on the offensive side. I don't think we have answers yet, but I think you need to think about how your company can use this. But do think about the other side, the defensive side, how it could be used against you, what can go wrong, how your company can be targeted, how your company can be misled, how your company could be competed against. I mean, that's the other thing. If we're getting a lot of pressure from our clients actually to use ChatGPT for certain things because clients think it will save them money. Again, we're getting pressure on that. I'm not sure yet whether those requests are sophisticated or not, because pushing us to do things that can create different kinds of risks, again, we got to be careful about that, but you're going to see those same kinds of issues from your customers and from your clients. And so really do think about it from both of those perspectives.
Thank you for heightening everyone's awareness. It will be interesting to revisit the conversation in a few months and see where we are. Obviously, things will not be the same. And so I'm tremendously grateful to both of you for sharing your perspectives on where we are and where we could be and what we need to be aware of. I hope that our participants feel better informed as they walk away from this conversation. Our contact information will be sent to you along with a follow-up note. I did also want to mention that the IAA is preparing to convene a FinTech forum for individuals who are responsible for assessing their firm's technology needs, evaluating and determining appropriate technology solutions, setting priorities for technology adoption, and overseeing technology implementation and ongoing management. So if you or others in your firm are interested in participating in that forum, please do reach out to me. My contact information, as I said, will be forthcoming. With that, thank you to all of our participants and again to our speakers. It has been great. I hope the rest of your week goes well.
Thanks for having us, Nancy.
Thank you.
Pleasure.